If you've ever fished at night, you know how the dark does something to the world. It strips away the small things until only the shape of what's essential remains. The water stops being water and becomes a listening thing. The bobber becomes a question mark. On the night I went out alone to the river that had been part of my life since I was a kid, I learned that some questions don't want answers. They want witnesses. I had been fishing that river since I was small enough to wrap my hands around a cork handle. The place lived in me like an ache and a relief both. Summers with my grandfather teaching me to bait a hook without jabbing my fingers. Nights when the town was asleep and the river sang under a moon you could sit on like a bench. Like anyone who grows up in a place, I had inherited its private vocabulary, where the current slowed, which boulder hid the best small mouth, the way the cattails whispered in a late wind. You learn that if you pay attention, water tells you things. This night was supposed to be simple, a quick trip to clear my head. A week of meetings, a house full of small obligations, and a weight at the base of my skull that felt like a slow pilfering of patience. I packed light, rod, 2 spools of line, an old lantern that still held the faint smell of diesel from my grandfather's truck, a thermos with coffee gone lukewarm too fast, and a box of lures my father once gave me when I left for college. That box had the kind of dents that carry the memory of other hands. The drive to the river was short. I knew every mile like a spine. A summer storm earlier in the week left the air clean and raw, and a thin mist hugged the water like breath. The town's sodium lamps looked far away, pushed back by a curtain of trees. I parked at the lot by the east bank, where an unpaved road met the water. The air smelled of damp earth, crushed leaves, and something sweeter, the faint scent of rotting grass where the river's current had left a line. I should have noticed that scent and dismissed it as river breath. Instead, I let it slip into the parts of me that hold small warnings. It was near midnight when I launched the old aluminum boat. The motor coughed a sickly start and then settled into a tired hum. There's a ritual to casting off at night. You check your lines twice. Make sure the anchor isn't tangled in something grown heavy with weeds. And you tell the river you'll be careful. I tied the lantern to the bow and let the glow paint the water a dull honey. The rest of the world retreated into black velvet that seemed to have been cut for the occasion. I rowed to my favorite spot, a long, narrow bend where the water curls under a stand of ash trees and weeds drop off into a deep pool. The surface there holds secrets in the way cups hold coins. I anchored a little upstream and let the boat swing slowly with the current. The only sounds were the occasional pop of a carp taking a breath, the faint stutter of insects, and the creak of my oars in their oarlocks. I sat back on the bench and lit my thermos coffee, more for the motion of my hands than for warmth. The night was not empty. It hummed with expectation, and expectation is the prey of the superstitious and the hopeful alike. My grandfather used to say, "Fish when you need to think, not when you want to catch." I had come to think, to let the night do its thing. The river obliges thinking by removing distractions. It forces you inward until whatever is lodged in your chest will either speak or fall back to sleep. A little past midnight, the first thing happened. A sound, not from the water, but from the dark between the trees on the far bank. It was a low, slow knock. 3 times, a pause, then 2. At first, I thought it might be a branch against a trunk. Then the pattern repeated, and my stomach tightened. A knock in the night at the bend with a rhythm oddly like a code. The kind of little noise you do not want to admit bothers you because admitting it is the first step to assigning it agency. I took my eyes off the water and listened. The knock came again. This time, faintly, a second sound answered. A splash, then a soft scraping, like a boot on stone. Out there, somewhere beyond where my lantern reached, shapes moved in the underbrush. I tried to rationalize. Fishermen setting lines, a drunk stumbling home, a hunter late for legal reasons. None of those explanations fit cleanly. The knock continued in the same measured cadence, patient as a clock. I told myself I was being foolish. You make yourself rational to keep the night honest. I cast the line with the practiced flick of a wrist, lure arcing into the dark like a comma, and watched the bobber settle. It bobbed like a small thought. Waiting, the sound tapped again. 3, pause, 2. The rhythm was not musical. It felt more like a message. Whoever or whatever was making it was deliberate. Fishing at night is a conversation. You throw the bait, you wait, you listen to the creak under the hull and to your breath, and sometimes to things that do not belong to your life. The bobber floated. I took a sip of coffee and wrapped my jacket higher around my neck. The mist thickened until the lantern light seemed to smear into a luminous field. Then the bobber dipped. Not a violent strike, but a delicate take, like the water itself had tried the lure on and found it edible. I struck and felt the line go tight, the pleasant shock of weight that confirms life. The reel sang, and I cranked, the fish fighting with a practiced stubbornness. When it came up, a medium-sized bass broke the water with a surprise splash. I laughed, the sound small and stupidly relieved. We'd both done our work correctly. The fish took the bait. I kept it. The river did not change its mind. I returned the fish, actually, not in some eco-piety, but because something in me resisted greed that night. I unhooked it gently, watched its gills pulse, and saw it drop away like a living punctuation. The knock resumed. 3, pause. 2. I could not ignore it any longer. I picked up the lantern and shone it across the water. The beam cut through the mist and landed on the opposite bank. There, in the pool of light between 2 ash trees, were the shapes of 3 people standing with their backs to me. They were tall, their clothing dark, and one of them had a flash of white at the head, like a kerchief. They stood in unnatural stillness, as if listening for something I could not hear. No one moved toward me. They did not gesture. They did not wave a flashlight. They merely tapped, patient as if conducting a slow, private ritual. I switched off the lantern for a heartbeat, testing the night as if it were an animal. In the span between one breath and the next, their silhouettes persisted. It is impossible to describe how certain things keep asserting themselves in the dark. After a while, you begin to trust what your senses tell you. I considered calling out, "Hello?" the way you call across a field to a friend. But something in the air tightened, and the word shrank in my mouth like a leaf into a fist. Instead, I made a decision that would knot itself into everything that followed. I rode toward them. There is a foolish courage that shines as bright as a lamp in nearby towns. The need to see what you suspect you'd better not. Many nights at the river, I had taught boys to fish and told them stories about things in water. I carried that lineage into the oars and let the current push me toward the bank. The 3 figures watched me approach. As I cut the motor and drifted within 20 yards, I could make out details. One was an older man with shoulders rounded like a chair. Another was a woman whose hands hovered at her sides. The third, the one with the white around the head, was a boy, small and unmoving. I tied the boat to a bent root, the rope creeping over wet stone. The bank was slick, and I slid a little as I climbed out. The figures did not step aside. Their skin looked darker than it should have under my lantern, as if something in their clothes absorbed light the way certain fabrics do. The woman's shawl was damp and smelled faintly of sweet grass. When she turned towards me, her eyes glinted silver in the light. They were eyes that had recorded more nights than I had lived. "Evening," I said, because it seemed the only word that cut the silence with politeness rather than violation. They did not startle. The man nodded like someone acknowledging the weather. "We see you come alone," he said. His voice was the voice of a radio on low, the kind you come to trust. "You come often?" I asked, the words tasting both strange and inevitable. The boy, who had not said anything yet, turned his head and pointed with a finger, the way children point to the parts of the world that matter. "He left his boat," the woman murmured, and there was a softness to her voice like wind through reeds. Her finger indicated the river rather than me. She moved closer to the water and cupped her hands beneath the surface, bringing up a small, sodden toy. A plastic soldier, its colors gone soft. She pressed it into the boy's hands. "You know this place?" I asked. "We know places," the man said. "Places remember." It was a phrase that felt both harmless and enormous. I thought of the trees and how each one could keep the history of 1,000 small actions. To say a place remembers makes the inanimate conspiratorial in a way that both comforts and terrifies. If the place knows, then one is never truly private. The trio led me, without fuss, a quarter-mile downriver along a path of stones and roots until we reached a small cove I had fished once as a child and thought I'd never find again. The water there was surprisingly clear, a small glass bowl. In its shallow edge were a dozen items: a child's hat, a frayed life jacket strap, a pair of shoes tied together like a ritual, and a notebook whose cover had been softened by water and rubbed thin. I recognized one thing in particular, a laminated photograph half sunk beneath pebbles. It was the kind of photo you take at a fair. A child with a huge grin and 2 missing teeth. An adult whose face was cropped at the edge, the sun high and cruel behind them. On the back, in peeling tape, someone had written a name and a date. My hands shook when I picked up the picture. The name was my cousin's. That one tore open a place in me I had been pretending was a closed seam. I had not seen that face since the funeral. I had not known this river had kept such an archive. "You kept this?" I asked. "We keep what is left," the woman said. "Sometimes people bring things home. Sometimes things come home by themselves." "What do you do with them?" I asked, feeling more like an intruder than a listener. "We keep them," the man said. "We do not throw them away. We speak their names and set them where the water won't take them." When he said "we," it felt less like a pronoun and more a covenant. People who have been chosen, or who chose themselves, to be caretakers of what the river returns. I was unsettled. Anger and sorrow tasted close together in my mouth. My cousin had been 6 when he slipped from the bank and never came back. After he was gone, the town made lanterns and prayers. The river had been searched, Divers had gone down, and there had been a small public reckoning. After a while, the town resumed its other obligations. People marched back into their lives with the bandage of time. I blamed myself in private. That photograph was a private confirmation that the river had kept a thing from the world and kept it anyway. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though already I knew. The night has a way of asking you to bear witness, not to solve, but to watch and remember. The woman touched my arm. Her skin was warm and dry. "Because you come often," she said, "you remember how to sit with water. People who come alone learn better how to listen. You're telling me I should take this back," I said, clumsy with an idea of restitution. "No," the man said, "you don't fix things by taking them home. You fix things by remembering them out loud, by telling others they were here." He looked at the river like someone waiting for an answer. And sometimes the river asks for something. The boy who held the plastic soldier had the air of someone determining the gravity of a question. He stepped forward and offered the soldier to me. "For you?" he asked. "So you can remember." I took the toy like a relic. It was gritty with river silt, and the color was patient, turned to a winterless gray. The triviality of a child's toy being an instrument of conscience shocked me into silence. I placed it in my jacket pocket. That night grew teeth in ways I had not bargained for. The three of them, guardians, it turned out, of the river's abandoned things, shared stories in low voices. They spoke of small tragedies, a boat unmoored in a storm, a name scrawled on a scrap and blown into the reeds, a mother who cut a son's hair before laying him with the water because the barber's shop was closed. I listened and felt the town's edges come undone into a geography I had never noticed. All the little neglects accumulated into a weight the river carried to its banks. Hours passed. The lantern had burned low, and the bones of the day creaked in my shoulders. The men and woman narrowed into features. The older man's hands were work-scarred and certain. The woman spoke with a voice that threaded like a loom. The boy's eyes were wide and old at once. They did not ask for anything of me beyond presence. They were not sinister. They were solemn, custodians of an imperfect ledger. The river, for its part, maintained its inscrutable patience. Near dawn, the boy pointed to a place on the far bank. The reeds thinned, and the water lapped at the stone like a hand rubbing sleep from an eye. "It answers," he said simply. "Sometimes it gives back what people lose when they need them to." His voice was almost a prayer. "What if it gives back something that can't be kept?" I asked. "Then you keep it until it wants to be gone again," the woman said. "You watch it like it was yours for a night. You bring it to light so someone else will remember." I left the cove with a handful of salvage, a photo, a toy soldier, a life jacket strap, and the sense that the river had enrolled me in some civic duty that had nothing to do with municipal budgets. It asked for witness. That was all. I promised to tell the stories I could, to leave the items with Heron, who ran the GAT in the morning. The trio watched me go with the impassive sympathy of people used to sending things away. Driving home, I clutched the plastic soldier like a knuckle of wood. I felt raw and full of a strange consolation. The water had not taken everything. It had given some things back. But the night had also shown me the stubborn, unglamorous truth that cities have hinterlands of memory no civic planning touches. My cousin's photograph rested under my glove compartment like a tiny, accusing witness. The past, the river said, doesn't always vanish. It circulates. Weeks later, I had a short piece in the paper, respectful and careful, a story about the Gats Night custodians and the small cargo of things the river returned. People found it tender and then found ways to make it convenient. A local PTA donated life jackets. Someone raised money for better signage and more lights on the banks. Heron got a new raincoat, but the truer work stayed quieter. Some nights I would go back and sit at the cove with the lantern and listen. Sometimes, under the thin moon, I would hear the rhythm, knock, 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 pause, too, and know that someone else was out there waking the river's memory. Once in a while, I'd find another small offering on the stone bench, a handwritten name on a scrap, a glass bead from a bracelet. A toy returned. The town's life continued to move. The river continued to move too, both indifferent and just. The end of the story is not tidy. The river kept doing what rivers do. It gave and kept and took. Sometimes it returned bodies. Sometimes it returned a cap, a shoe, a photograph. The people who haunt the banks, guardians in humble clothes, kept vigil and taught an awkward community lesson about attention. I kept my part. I told the story, and I told it again until my cousin's name passed into someone else's mouth, and not only into the pocket of my silence. On the last night I went back, it rained. Not hard, nothing theatrical, just a rain that polished the air like a lens. I set my lantern on the bench and let the light make a small island. I took out the plastic soldier and set it on top of the photograph. The soldier's faded face turned to the river as though saluting. I whispered the boy's name, and the rain blurred it into the world. Sitting there, listening to water and wind, the terror I had felt the first night softened into something like responsibility. The river is indifferent, yes, but it also keeps score in its own weather. There are many ways to finish a story. You can try to close it like a lid, or you can leave it like a flame, small, steady, and tended. The river had taught me a third option: witness. To witness is to stay with what is returned and to make sure it is not alone. To witness is a small mercy that costs nothing but time. If you go out to a river at night and you hear that soft, strange tapping, listen. Sometimes it will be a branch. Sometimes it will be fishermen. Sometimes it will be the river itself reminding you that it keeps what we cast away. If you find a toy on a bank or a photo washed to the edge like a secret, do not be quick to pocket it. Lay it on a bench, light a lamp, say the name you find, leave it in the light, tell someone you saw it. It is not much, I know, a cheap action among the world's other failures, but it is the stitch that keeps a small hole from becoming a gap. Years after that night, I still take the same road to the river. I fish less for trout and more for the sense of being awake enough to see where the world leaves its scraps. Sometimes the river returns a face I recognize. Sometimes it returns a thing whose owner did not know they had lost it. Sometimes it gives nothing at all, but always, inevitably, it asks for someone to notice. The final image that stays with me is the soldier on the photograph, small and patient, saluting the water. It is modest and stubborn. It says, plainly, "We were here. Don't forget us."